Welcome to another episode of Metabolic Radio with Shane
And
Pace. I always get it wrong. That way, and Taylor MP, your hosts. Today,
on my picture that fits. There's me. There's him. Me. Him.
me,
Him. Me.
this guy.
See,
Oh, dang it.
and on YouTube it could be either.
Windshield wipers.
Yeah, he's there and I'm here.
Anyway, sorry, that was really fun. So today, I just realized that the people that are listening to the audio aren't going to have any idea what we were just doing. Just so you know, audio audio listeners, we were just playing around with the camera and pointing and stuff, so disregard that. But today, we wanted to talk about a conversation we had with a lot of members a while back, because we think this is a really great topic to talk about, because there's a lot of differing opinions and there's a lot of pros and cons to this particular topic, which is...
We talked about it on our forum, people, and that means you need to be on our forum. Anyway,
that's correct. If you're not on the forum, go to Facebook, type in Metabolic Radio Private Forum. You can join for free right now. And we will add you to the group, add you to the conversation, and answer your questions on the show in our Q&A sessions. But the topic for today is, should you be using a weight belt or wraps, knee wraps, straps, or some type of assisting equipment or not? The pros and cons of both of these things, or all of these things. And
I was going to say the answer is yes. For or against, yes.
So you're saying yes, they should?
No, that's not what I said. You asked
You
the
did.
question.
I asked the question and you said yes.
Should you use or not?
And you said
I
yes.
said or not. And yes is the answer to both of those statements.
Oh, to both. Oh, okay. So yeah, what Shane is alluding to is that it depends.
About undergarments of adults.
What?
Depends, dude.
I'm
going to start putting up pictures.
Oh,
I will get a picture.
You're just old, dude. You're just old.
No.
Yeah,
It's just,
I know
just,
what that is. I know what that is.
Yeah, but you should know that. I should not have to define this. I will get the crayons out later.
Okay. You can draw some doodles for me. But so when it comes to these types of equipment, what they are is they are assistance equipment. Their purpose is to provide structural support of key parts of your body.
Correct.
For specific reasons.
Correct.
Now, it depends on why you would use these, whether you should or shouldn't, quote unquote. Now, just listen to our disclaimer at the beginning of the episode, because we are going to talk some conceptual things. If you have an injury or you're working with a doctor on something and your doctor has told you to use a piece of equipment, just listen to your doctor. But we're gonna talk about this.
Okay, I got to say one thing. I am not a doctor. Before I say what I'm about to say, that may not be true. That very well could not be true. A matter of fact,
listen to their doctor?
Yeah.
No,
I'm not recommending. I am not recommending to not listen to your doctor. Do not get me wrong. I know that, but there are many people that completely blow off what their doctor says. You just went red. They completely blow off what their doctor says, and they come out healthier because of it.
I understand, and
it's
I
not
agree
safe.
with you. But what I'm saying is
disclaimer.
For liability reasons, I'm not recommending that you do anything.
Yeah,
but what we're going to do is conceptually talk about these kinds of things. Right?
And in realistic perspective,
it's because people. The only reason we're saying that is because people are so happy these days. That's honestly.
Yes, they are. That is true. You are correct, and I'm not taking away from it. And you should say it. But that being said, it doesn't change the fact.
I don't agree with that statement.
Not always.
Even though I made it.
Yes, not always. Not always should you do that. But that being said, you always want to be smart, and the smarter course is to go listen to a doctor, because they're a professional that you're going to for a reason.
If they're the right doctor.
You're still going to him for a reason. But yes.
Yeah. But so anyway, what we're talking about is things like back braces, knee braces, wrist wraps to support the wrist, or straps that you can use, or hooks that you can use to wrap around bars and for grip assistance and that kind of thing. Socks or compression sleeves, or
you brought
these
up
kind of things
something
that people wear for injuries.
you went and brought up something using the reps for grip.
Mm-hmm.
That I would say no to.
I agree. I said grip assistance. I didn't say it was going to increase your grip strength.
I know.
In fact,
I know.
We know it'll decrease it.
Yeah, and I was going to say, to be honest, if anything, I would change up your technique for grabbing the bar and drop those, because those will ultimately weaken your grip quite a bit.
Well, let's start with that. So wrist straps or hooks, these are specifically things that you can wrap around a bar or the handles or whatever you're using them for, to quote unquote assist your grip or allow you to lift heavier or more or those kind of things, or to maintain grip even after your grip fatigues. I would originally use these in the initial years that I was training.
Me too.
I have since dropped them a couple of years ago because they slowed me down so much. You think that you're like going to advance yourself because you're like, well, my grip hasn't caught up yet, but my other muscle groups, like let's say deadlifts, right? I'm going to use straps or hooks on deadlifts because my grip fatigues before my back or my legs do. And that might sound logical until you keep training that and training that and training that, and your grip never gets better, but your grip is even further. The buffer between where your grip is at and where your other muscle group strength is, it becomes even bigger separation. And so now it takes you even that much longer to build up your grip strength to match the strength of other muscle groups. And if you guys want to see, go look on my Instagram for my deadlift PR, which of 405. And this is how this whole conversation started, which was because one of our members, Ben, saw the video and was like, dang, dude, you didn't use a weight belt for that or anything, or straps or anything? And I was like, yeah, and he's like, why not? And I was like, well, long story short, I didn't need it. And that's how this whole conversation started.
Both of which comes down to, like we talked about in the last one, in 106, because this will be on 107. It's goals based. You know, you got to look at it from a goals perspective on that, because that's why it's a yes for both directions on that. Were you right in that conversation? Absolutely. Was Ben right about that? Absolutely.
Because we made different points.
Because you had different goals and you had it from a different perspective. My belief system, and I'm going to take it from the idea of using a grip assist wrap. Here's a comparison that isn't a real one, because I don't know of any machines that do this. But let's say you could bench press with a hydraulic machine. Okay, and the hydraulic machine does the weight for you. You're not any stronger. You're doing more weight. You're not any stronger. And the problem with doing deadlifts with a grip assist is it's not that you don't get stronger, because you do. Like you said, you'll get stronger in different muscle groups, but you won't get any stronger in your grip whatsoever, and you will lose strength. So in a theoretical sense, it makes it weaker. Now when we're talking about the basis of what brought this up, and Ben's statement, if you're a power lifter, and
he is correct.
And he does powerlifting, yes. He and I talked about that.
Competitively, yes.
Yes, he and I talked about it after the fact, because I wasn't sure if I can say it, certain beforehand. But if you're going to go in and powerlift, okay, and in the competition you're in, you're allowed to use a weight belt, because you can't always use one. But if you are in the competition that you're in,
or like a bench shirt and those kind of things.
Yeah, it's called the biggest one's a slingshot. So the slingshot, which is legal as far as my understanding in almost any competition for powerlifting, but I'm sure there's some that don't. But you know what I'm saying. The thing about those is it makes it so you have more of a capacity to pull a larger weight for like deadlifts.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you can. The wrist, the grip assist based straps, I don't think are allowed at all in powerlifting. So if you were to
not
use,
that I'm aware of either,
right?
And so I'm not a power lifter, so.
Well, and I've been to competitions, but I've never competed. So so mine's based on a visual more than a participant. Anyhow, but the reality of it is, if you use those and you go in and compete, you're going to do a less weight than you can actually do in when you're practicing. Mm-hmm. You won't be able to perform at the higher weight. You mm-hmm. can't perform at a higher weight because you won't be able to hold the bar.
Yeah.
So that's a negative in that. Okay. Will a weight belt actually assist you in pushing more weight or pulling more weight in that case? Absolutely, 100% it will, mm-hmm. Because that's one of the weaknesses that people have when they're actually doing a deadlift. So you can perform at a higher weight level. That does not necessarily mean that you are stronger than somebody who can't pull the same weight as you, mm-hmm. Because you're using a belt and they're not. You know what I'm saying? So it really, again, it's a question of what your goals are. When you're using a weight belt and you're doing a deadlift, since that's the biggest point we're talking about right now, what does it do? It weakens your core overall. It doesn't. That isn't the goal of someone who's trying to compete for a highest weight they can pull in a competition. Mm-hmm. But in yours, in my perspective, that is more so what I'm looking for. I want to have the capacity to be able to, in real life situations, pick up the back of a car if I need to and move it without a belt assisting me. Yeah. And the reality of life is, if you're always lifting with a belt, you would not be able to do that. And if you tried it, you were likely to injure yourself.
Yeah, that's the biggest point that of a controversial argument that we had was, so Ben said, why didn't you use these pieces of equipment? And my answer was, I didn't need it. And my goal when I'm lifting is I want to put my body at the most optimal performance level that my body can produce by gradually, appropriately increasing my resistance over a long period of time, perfecting my form without the use of assistance equipment. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that assistance equipment doesn't work, because it does. It definitely will immediately increase your performance or the ability to lift more load or support your core or support your knees or provide stability or whatever its function is to serve. However, if you do that consistently, even infrequently, I would argue it will weaken your ability to perform that without the assistance equipment, thus causing a higher risk of injury. And why I say even infrequently is because if you're doing 1 rep maxes and you do it with a belt, what's going to happen when you try to do that 1 rep max without the assistance equipment?
You're correct. The only thing I will differ on, and in fact I'll differ in a big way on this, if you do it infrequently, you can get kind of the best of both worlds.
That's how it should be done, in my opinion. Yeah.
As long as you don't always 1 rep max with a belt.
True.
So if you go for a 1 rep max without a belt, and you do it with a belt, and you do it without a belt, and you do it with a belt, and you do it with a belt, then you do it without a belt a couple of times, and you kind of play with that, I think you're going to get more of an effect that's going to be across the spectrum, because you will be building up muscle groups that, doing it the way that you and I do it without a belt, you will not get if you don't use the belt. I mean, is it an effective tool for strength? It is, without question, and anybody who actually has looked at it knows that's true. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't strengthen you overall for when you don't have that belt. Mm-hmm. If you do it in conjunction, and sometimes you do the one and sometimes you do the other, it's going to strengthen that capacity to do. Mm-hmm. But you've got to be more. I would say the frequency should be less belt and more non, if you want to go for that direction, unless you're competing, because that changes it all.
Mm-hmm. But just understand that the more frequently you use any assistance piece of equipment, the more your body will develop an adaptation to rely on that piece of equipment.
Yes.
And thus, if you continue increasing the load that you're lifting with a high frequency of usage of assistance equipment, then your likelihood of injury and your risk of that will go up substantially. Yes. So it's really about finding the sweet spot balance. I don't know what that is, because I don't use assistance pieces of equipment. And Ben made a good point too, in that. So I said, well, I want to master the exercise without the use of the equipment. And he said, well, doesn't a master use all his tools? And I said, that's a good point. However, I'm not looking to particularly do that or utilize the tools for that reason. I would much rather do this over a long period of time, even if the belt gives me a little extra advantage. Because I just want to. Like, honestly, I feel more badass, to be honest. Like, I like the idea of not using it. That's just my reason.
Well, and I still agree with that, but I have a different perspective on that. The specialist is better at the detailed, and the generalist is better at the overall. Yes. Speaking from a perspective of being a master, you have to master all things related to that. If you are always using a belt, or most of the time using a belt, you are not a master. You are not equipping something that makes you a master. And the reality of it is, you are missing a component, which is not using the belt.
Yeah.
So, a true master is not someone who is. You'll have a specialist, okay, who isn't a master for an entire, the entire discussion. But they are pinpoint. They are, they're hitting a thing specifically, right? And they will know more about the specifics than the master will know about the entire subject.
Yeah.
And again, the funny thing about the conversation that you and I both had in that was it comes down to perspective. All of it comes back to perspective. As long as you keep your perspective in line, it's a yes answer.
Yeah.
It's yes, you shouldn't use a belt, and it's a yes, you should use a belt. And should you use a belt all the time? He doesn't wear one every day. I know Ben doesn't wear one every day, and I know he doesn't wear one every time he deadlifts. He does it with a specific purpose in mind.
Yeah.
And he does it with the point of trying to hit his highest pulling weight. Will he hit a higher pulling weight because he wears a belt?
Yes.
Absolutely. But that is not yours or my goal. We are trying to hit higher goal. A higher weight, but we're not trying to do it with the assistant factor of a belt.
Yeah. If he is trying to build up the max weight that he can lift within a certain sport or competition that allows assistance equipment, he ought to use a belt for the purpose 100%. Of hitting that goal.
Yes.
Will that increase his risk of injury? It's possible, depending on how he trains. Maybe not. But for me, my goal is, more specifically, I want to lift the max weight that I can lift with proper form without using a belt. That is my goal. My goal is to do it without those assistance equipments. Now, could I lift more with assistance equipment? Yes.
Without question.
But I just have a slight variation or tweak on the specifics of my goal, because that gives me more intrinsic motivation to not use assistance equipment. And in my opinion, it keeps me safer. It makes me conservative in when I do take things up, and I don't think it stunts my progress, but it slows.
You're conservative. You're conservative anyway, dude. By nature, you're pulling weight by your form. I told you this myself after that discussion erupted, and Ben and I talked about it, and he brought up the idea that you could pull a higher weight for sure.
I could, because I did it 2 times in a row.
And not only that,
because my Sue was filming, and I took a picture the first time on accident, and then I waited 5 minutes and I pulled it again. I didn't know I could.
That being said, though, Taylor, you did it without losing any form at all, and that means that you could pull a higher weight for sure.
Yeah, because you were tight. There is a little bit of give that's allowed.
Oh yes.
Typically, the thoracic spine naturally flexes forward, and so you can actually still do a proper, safe deadlift for your low back, your lumbar spine being supported, even with some slight thoracic forward flexion, if your muscles are engaged appropriately. And you'll see some people deadlift in that fashion. I just don't do that personally. And so you're right in that I probably could lift more, but you're right in that I am a little bit more
you didn't lose any lumbar. You didn't lose any, and that is rare. People lose it in their lumbar almost every time they deadlift, to an extent, because the load changes. You didn't, from the angle, you couldn't see it perfectly, but you didn't appear to lose any of your lumbar setup, the way you set up. That I'll tell you right now, I know for a fact you could pull over 30 pounds over what you were at, for sure.
30, you think? So you think 435?
I'm guarantee you could pull 435 right now. Do I know you could do a safe?
Well, I've been cutting, because that video was at 175 and I'm at 165 right now.
You would have a harder time because
my glycogen and my performance and my strength is probably down. And in fact, I know my strength is down. So
would likely be down, right?
Yeah.
Right. But again, all that in consideration, at the time when you pulled that, you likely could have pulled 435 to 450. Now, if you had a belt on, you would have pulled 450 probably pretty.
If I had a belt on, yeah, that would be. My grip was fine in that, and that's the thing.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the other point I wanted to make. Is now not talking about a weight belt, but talking about the wrist straps that you can wrap around the bar.
See those?
Those are different. When I was about, let's see, like 4 years ago, my deadlifts, I was using assistance equipment. I was using wrist straps to support my wrists because I'm an ectomorph and I have thinner bones. So when I'm like, pushing dumbbells or unstable objects or bench pressing, I felt like I didn't have support in my wrists. When I was deadlifting or doing pulls, I would use the straps and wrap those around the equipment so that I could maintain a grip for longer because I had the assistance when I'm doing my pulling exercises. When I was deadlifting, I would use those. And when I would deadlift with those, my strength, though it was increasing, every time that I tried to do it without the straps, my grip would fail and I would not be able to hit the rep ranges that I was hitting before or even come close to it. At one point when I started looking into this, okay, what's the effectiveness of these different pieces of equipment and things, and I started realizing that I was possibly crutching on them, and it was actually a limiting factor for myself. I actually did away with them altogether, and I have not used any piece of assistance equipment for almost 4 years, and I'm pretty sure that's about the time frame ish, roughly. And since then, the last 2 years is where I've specifically focused on just pure raw strength. And I said, I want bigger legs, and I'm going to get my squats and my deadlifts up substantially in terms of strength without compromising my form. And so I drilled technique, and I found my sweet spot for each of these exercises and got very comfortable with my proprioception and my coordination during those movements. And then I started just slowly following progressive overload, 2.5 pounds on each side, 2.5 pounds on each side, 2.5 pounds on each side. And I built that up over the last 2 years, and that's what produced the 405 deadlift. This has been a process of 2 years building up to that. I didn't even think it could hit 315 because I put such mental limitations on myself. I hit 315 and I was like, that was really easy. That was really doable. Let's see what else I can do. And then I built it up. And then a year later, I hit 405, which just happened to be recently. And I did all of that with only minor modifications of my grip and no assistance equipment during that entire time. And so that 405 is with just pure grip strength. And I never could have fathomed that I'd be capable of doing that without an assistance piece of equipment, especially a weight belt either. So that's personally what I take pride in, and what I enjoy doing is not using those pieces of equipment. But that doesn't detract from their purpose, their use, and they are effective at what they do. It's just that I like the way that I do it. Even though it's slower, and I may not peak where I would peak with assistance equipment, but I also don't want to use the equipment, like what I see in terms of results, and then continue to use it as a crutch and then put myself at risk for an injury later on, which some people can do.
Right, and I agree with that. I mean, the video that you've seen of me doing 365, I had already done that 3 times, and I did it repping it. And then, I mean, it was a down up, and I touch and go. I don't bang it down at all. So mine's a lot different in perspective because of how I do it. It's completely different. All that being said, I jumped up really fast. I went from 335 to 360, and then tried 405 that day. And granted, I didn't push through it. Probably could have.
Because you got it up to like your shins or knees and then dropped it, right?
I didn't get it all the way. If I'd gone to my knees, I would have gone all the way up. But I got it up about 3 inches off of the ground. I was right at the point where it would have broke, and I could have got over that edge, that hump.
Your sticking point?
Yeah, but I didn't cross it. I was right on the edge, and I thought, this is not worth it. But see, I jumped from 335 up to trying 405 in the course of 3 weeks.
Wow, that's a big jump.
Yeah, so when I missed it, That's when I went back and did the video and did that 365. And like we've talked about, that's why you can see that I was injured at the end of that.
Yeah.
It wasn't from the weight. I had full control of that weight when I did it. It wasn't from that weight at all. It was from the weight that I tried just previous to that. Because I put that weight down, took the weight off, and then went for that again. And do I think I could do 405? I'm pretty certain I really could have then. I just didn't want to push through it. And I didn't want to take the risk of of an injury. If I had a belt on, it wouldn't even been hard.
Yeah. So when we're talking now about injuries, this is something that I want to bring up because some people say, well, what about if you have an injury? What if you're recovering from an ACL surgery, or you have a partial tear in a specific ligament or tendon, and you want to use an assistance piece of equipment to support that, to prevent future injury, which is often how some people will use these pieces of equipment. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? What are your thoughts?
Yes.
Right?
Again, it's a yes answer, because the reality of it is, let's take from a massage therapy perspective, that when you have an injury site, the first thing you want to do is you want to restrict the movement of it so that it can actually start to beginning to heal. The thing that most massage therapists do not talk about after that point is now they want you to get movement.
Yes.
If you put it in a cast, automatically what happens is you restrict the movement, and you have you restrict it enough that you actually have I'm trying to think of the actual word for muscle.
Atrophy.
Not atrophy. It deals with muscle. Starts with an S. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. It's the idea of atrophy. So you have.
I know which word you're talking about. I just can't think of it off the top of my head.
It's not really relevant, but it is, because it's the right word, but it's not relevant. We don't have to use it. So, but when you have your muscles. When you have your muscles. Yes, I like Popeye, and that's what he would say. But when you have your muscle break down, and because of something like that, because of a restricted point, it will actually come back pretty quick because of muscle memory, and it'll swell back to the point where, not swell, but it'll grow back to the point that it was at. But you have a massive weakness because of the restriction of the cast. Anyone who's broken their hand in probably the last 15 years realizes that instead of doing a full cast like they used to, they do half cast because they want your hand to be able to move. And the reason why is that movement causes healing factors within the bone itself, which are far stronger than if they kept it restricted. And so, in the, like I said, in the world of massage therapy, it was way beyond its time in that, because they were talking about the idea of, you want to restrict it. You want to do the idea of rest, ice, compression, and elevation. And as soon as you get to the point where it's not an extreme acute injury, you start to work into movement again. And you want to do it as soon as you physically can, because it will make it heal faster, it will make it heal better, and it will become back stronger than you were beforehand.
Yeah.
The exact reverse of that is if you restrict movement. So when they cast it, what happens? You have the exact opposite result. You lose strength. You lose a lot of the actual healing factors. It does not heal as well. It does not heal as appropriately. It may heal in the correct position, and that's one of the reasons why they cast like big bones. Because they want it to be casted so that it doesn't. So like
it doesn't move into an appropriate position and heal incorrectly, and then cause much worse problems later on
in the future. Right. So is there a point to it? There absolutely is. But you want to get as much movement as you can possibly get in any injury that you can. If you can get movement in without doing more damage,
correct,
it is always better.
Yeah, movement without further damaging. It's like when we talk about recovery sessions. The goal of that is not to re-break down muscle. It's to aid in the recovery and repair process. And movement from injury, even acute injuries like this, from breaks and tears and things like that, the right level of movement will actually expedite the recovery process. And that's why you do physical therapy, and then you do exercise therapy with a trainer post physical therapy, and then you can get back to training. But the thing that I want to talk about is when someone knows that they've had a chronic like joint issue, for example, and they rely on a knee brace for years and years and years. They exercise, they run, they lift, all those kind of things. And the person that I can think of in my head is my dad. He uses a knee brace when he exercises. He's not super dedicated to exercise, but he is dedicated to physical activities and aerobic training, and he does some resistance, and he has phases where he's more or less focused. And I've noticed, at least that from the times that I can remember, he tends to rely on a knee brace for one of his knees. I don't think he wears it every time, which I think he wears it when he feels he needs it, which is a little bit better. But what happens is if you have an injury and someone tells you you need to wear a knee brace to support that from now on, that's going to limit its recovery and repair. And some injuries, they may be too far to do anything about. But I think that probably the majority of injuries would be able to see some positive benefit and recovery and strengthening with little to no use or the appropriate infrequent use of an assistance piece of equipment. Because if you know, okay, I have a knee injury, I'm going to wear a knee brace every time I go to the gym to support that so that I don't re-injure it. Then what happens is your body gets used to that knee brace or whatever that assistance piece of equipment is. And
it requires it.
It requires it. Your muscle atrophies. Even if you don't see a lot of atrophy, the performance of that muscle will decrease because you have this compressed material that's supporting the joint system without the nearly as much needed required stability from the neighboring muscle groups and joint tissue. And so now, as you do leg exercises with a knee brace or other equipment, that those muscles continue to get stronger and stronger, except for that area around that joint system. And now, as you have a stronger
your risk
force,
goes up.
Your risk goes up because you have a stronger force on a weaker on a lever that has a weaker fulcrum, and now you're putting more force through a weak fulcrum, and you're going to be more likely to injure yourself. So my recommendation would be. And I am exercise therapy certified, so I can talk a little bit about this. But my recommendation would be to use a brace during the periods where it is needed, absolutely, and then work towards infrequent use with the goal of not needing it in the future with appropriate programmed and periodized resistance increases.
Absolutely.
So long as you're not experiencing pain.
Based on an injury itself. Agreed.
Yes.
In the category that we were initially talking about with this, not dealing with an injury, but dealing with performance.
Prevention and increasing performance. Yeah.
Right. That's a totally different monster.
Yeah.
But,
sorry for the noise.
Yeah, it's a street behind him.
Yeah.
And it's obviously a really nice motorcycle. And that's why it's fancy. But so let me put into this discussion two arguments that people need to think about too. The number one side of that is when people do partial reps, what happens is they get a strength increase immensely in that partial rep range.
In that range of motion.
Yes. So if they bench press and they come to the point where they're about like this is going to make a difference, as big as this or this. See, it's bigger here, even though it's the exact same size. But let's say it's about 2 inches, 3 inches away from the chest in a bench press. They're not going to have strength below that, and their strength will actually decrease in that range.
Yeah.
So, and it'll increase in the range they're in, and it'll decrease in the range they do not go into. And because of that, are they stronger? They are sort of.
Through that particular range of motion, and that's what develops sticking points.
Right, and that's the reason why they're stronger only to a point.
Yes.
Is because they're so much weaker in the other aspect of it that they're not gaining a full range of motion strength, which makes them weaker overall, not stronger.
And the other more likely to have an injury. So let's say that they're coming down with that bar, they're going to their range of motion that they know, and then for some reason they just slip a fraction of an inch below that. Now they're under their sticking point. They can't get it past because they haven't trained the strength. Now you suffer a shoulder injury.
Shoulder injury, muscle tears. A lot of things can come from that, but an extreme case of this, since we all know I like to go extreme, but this is a real one. This isn't me making up some extremely ludicrous number. Space. When an astronaut goes to space, they come back and they are substantially weaker because of the it's not a restriction.
Lack of gravity.
Because of the lack of gravity and the fact they don't have to push as much.
Yeah.
So that's another category that needs to be taken into consideration. because of that, right? I mean, it's the same. The principles are the same thing. It is a completely different thing, but the principles are identical. You know, when you remove the restriction of gravity, your potential strength movements in that range goes up exponentially. Mm-hmm. You could pick up things that you couldn't even come close to moving. If you're in space, you can move them without even much effort. On the Earth, it is an immense effort. The weight of the object has truly not changed, but the dynamics of it have. And so when the guy returns back,
because of the forces that are or not on it.
Yes, exactly right. The restrictions are released or not implemented. And so because of that, what happens is he's still using his muscles, but they aren't used in the same level. The magnitude's different. Now,
yeah, the amount of nerve impulses that needs to be sent to move that object are substantially lower.
Absolutely,
and that's
right.
why we've talked about nervous system adaptation. That is a major, essential part of strength development. Is you're teaching your body to be able to send the appropriate amount of nerve impulses to certain motor units in your muscle to actually cause movement.
Right, and that's, like I said, I think in these kind of discussions, resistance. Right, the people that and again, some things that somebody could do in space. So let's talk this from a unique experience concept. Not one that I have personally experienced, but I understand the principles behind it. Is there ways to keep your muscles from atrophying in space? Yes. Do you know how you could do that? Resistance bands.
Yeah.
The resistance doesn't change. It's still from a set point.
And they have certain levels of stuff like artificial gravity and mounted spin bikes and other hydraulic resistance machines and that kind of thing.
But they do a very microscopic perspective. The biggest wasting, and you would likely know this, and I don't know how many people are listening will understand this, but if you do not, I'll be a little bit surprised you don't understand this. But what is the biggest thing that decreases in astronauts? It's not muscle. It's bone.
Yeah, it's their vertebrae specifically, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's any aspect of bone, but yes.
Yeah, because bone is a live organ that the human body has adapted to gravity. It requires gravity for optimal health, to be honest.
I agree with that completely, and it's been proven by all the astronauts that got into space for long periods of time. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things that you got to understand is going to be part of this process. We've talked about in body typing even recently in our last discussion about it, that you have an endomorph whose attachment points and tendons are going to be substantially more strengthened than an ectomorph just by nature. Mm-hmm. Okay. You take an endomorph and you put him in space and he comes back, he may have very similar tendon reactions as an ectomorph because of the nature of where he's been.
Yeah.
And that is because of a restriction in what is being pushed against it. Mm-hmm. So when you're in my discussion in the specific category we're talking about in the forum, when we're talking about that kind of stuff, we see it from a perspective that we want to have as least amount of assistance, which space removing gravity is a massive assistance in the capacity of moving weight. So it's a similar concept, right? It's different because we don't have lack of gravity on Earth. Mm-hmm. The only time we're going to experience that kind of stuff if we go into a plane and they do a specific dive to make it so that we lose gravity field.
Underwater creates the illusion because the
illusion, but it's different because
because the water is supporting the object.
Right. It's a question of buoyancy at that point. But yeah, you still have a different resistance. So the difference in water is that the water itself becomes a resistance point.
Yeah.
In space, you wouldn't have that. You'd have a similar buoyancy concept.
There's no resistance.
That's what I'm saying. You would have a similar buoyancy, but you would have no resistance that you're fighting through. So there's a big difference between water and that, though the concept again is similar. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And that's why when we talk about these things, using it for specific categories, I am full bore thinking it's the right choice. Yeah. The problem is if you use it as a constant tool, it's no longer just a tool. It becomes a crutch. Yeah, and having it as a crutch does not make you stronger ultimately. It truly makes you weaker.
Yes.
So if you continually are on a crutch or in a wheelchair, eventually you'll lose the capacity to walk. And that is an absolute fact because you'll lose the capacity to use your legs.
Yeah.
But if you continually walk, okay, eventually could you stop walking because you can't walk anymore? Absolutely. You know, you can still have that risk, but the likelihood is substantially lessened.
Well, it's just about the balance. And that's I think that's what a good way to sum it up, since we're coming up on a long time here, but is understanding for your goals, is assistance equipment required for that goal and in what frequency, and finding the right balance so that it does act as a positive tool to positively impact your results without increasing the risk. And if it does increase risk, is the cost benefit ratio of using the equipment, like the benefit that you get, worth the risk or the cost that may have to be paid as a result of using that equipment? As long as the benefit outweighs that risk, then you should be able to use it and still continue to advance forward. And that just depends on an individual's goal and what piece of equipment they're using and how frequently and all that, you know.
I want to add a little bit I want to expand beyond our conversation, because it's appropriate with this in summation too, because this comes back to everything we've ever talked about with almost anything dealing with fitness. The
analogy of balance.
The concept comes down to risk versus reward. Let's say specific category, if somebody's taking drugs for performance reasons, okay, not for any other reason but performance. They want to do more weight. They want to look better. The aesthetics. They want to have all these things related to it for size and strength, right? You have to take that, analyze all the risks, analyze to see where the value is, and realize that you've got to take the risk and see, is that worth it to me ultimately? You may never experience the risk. You may not actually come to that as a conclusion, but you may. If you wear wrist wraps every time you bench press, are you going to necessarily have a problem with your wrists? Not necessarily. Most people don't do it. Do they have weaker wrists? They absolutely have to, because what we've talked about today. But it's a risk versus reward. Do you want to have the potential of having that risk, or do you want to not have the potential of having that risk? Yeah. Can you pick up a bar in a bench press without wraps on after having done it for years and have a wrist snap on you and have the bar drop on you anyway? Absolutely. But it's lessened substantially if you don't use wrist wraps. Okay, like I said, if you're going to work out, you got to weigh the idea of risk and reward. If you go in and you get a bench press, you can be injured no matter what, and do everything perfectly and still come out with a bad shoulder. You know, that the reality of life is there's risks and rewards in everything you do. Business life, personal life, everything. You know, if you want to date a person, the honest to goodness truth is, if you don't take the risk, you don't gain the reward of that.
That's just the nature of how it works.
Right. And so that's why I wanted to make this larger picture, because the reality is all these things tie together in this. The factors that we wanted to put into this discussion, because Taylor and I talked about this a little bit beforehand, comes down to the reality of, look at the tool, see what you're going to use it for, see what it's going to do for you related to your end goal. And if it's worth it, you do it. If it's not worth it, you don't do it. And that's just the simple realities of life. Take it all as a scale, always weighing which side of it makes more sense to you. If it's something that makes more sense to wear a weight belt and to deadlift because you want the most weight you can push, and you're not looking for the stuff that you and I are looking for, then they need to do that. But if it's the same perspective as what we have, which is, I want to have an overall effect. So I want to have a stronger back. I want to have a stronger core. I want to have a stronger, full circumference of my body. You're not going to have a stronger core with a weight belt, because you can't. It removes a key to it. What is one of the things that weakens? It weakens fascial tissues, because that's one of the things that holds everything in, and it doesn't need to be there. So it'll become thinner. Okay, is it going to go away? Not likely, but it might. Ultimately, if you kept doing it for centuries, I guarantee it would go away. But again, we don't have that timelines, right?
I don't know anyone who has lived past a century other than those centurions, like in blue zones.
Right, and I'm likely to be well over that soon. So, just kidding. But again, take it all in, weigh what you're looking at, weigh what you're going for, realize that others don't do it for those same reasons, and realize they're weighing it too, hopefully. you can give input, which I love Ben to death. I think he's an absolute stud. I love his input. And I'm not hacking him on this. That is not where I'm going with this at all, because his question was legitimately honest.
It was a great debate that we had.
It was a question.
We both were right about our particular points.
100%, right? And so you may have changed your point by the end of that conversation. I would never have taken that conversation away. I want that to be there. But realize other people may have different viewpoints, and it doesn't mean their goal is wrong either. Mm-hmm. Your goal, you and I have both said repeatedly in this conversation, you guys were both right in that conversation without question.
We just were talking about a slight variation of a point.
Perspective. You're taking a slight different variant. Mm-hmm. So, but like I said, that's why I wanted to throw a much larger summation on this, because I think everybody should look at everything about where they're going with anything in life, and they should take it and they should do risk reward.
Yep.
Because all rewards come from risk. There's no reward you're going to get that is a reward that you received for free.
Yep. Anything worth having did not come without great risk.
I agree with that. So
I think that's a good way to sum it up, man.
Sweet.
Well, there you have it, people. There is our perspective on pros and cons of using assistance pieces of equipment versus not. If you like us, go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star rating and review, because that helps boost us in the rankings and helps us help more people like you. And then if you want to get your questions answered on the show, then just join us on the Metabolic Radio Private Forum on Facebook. And just type that in the search bar, Metabolic Radio Private Forum. We will add you to the group, add you to the conversation, and answer your questions on the show.
Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5.
Cinco.
See.
All right. Have a good night, people. Bye.
Late.